Hello, everyone. My name is Effie Amondi Akera. So, over the past few weeks, I've had an amazing learning experience in the Global Technology and Development course. I have learned that the rapid and accelerating speed of technological progress sometimes outpaces the ability of societies to adapt to the resulting social and economic changes. It is in this light that I critically analyze the national energy policy. This is a policy that promises to address the development problem of energy poverty in Kenya. The policy aims to leverage technology, innovation, and sustainable energy system to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy to Kenyans by 2030. While its ambitions align with Kenya's broader development goals and also the sustainable development goals, it is important that we critically look at how these technological interventions will translate into real world improvements or if they will amplify existing inequalities. When we talk about energy poverty, we are referring to the lack of adequate, reliable, and affordable energy for lighting, for cooking, for heating, and for other daily activities necessary for human welfare and also for economic development. But we see that in Kenya, this is still a very big challenge. From the statistic, we can see that around 25% of Kenyans still lack access to electricity. In rural areas, only about 68% are connected compared to 90% in urban areas. 69% of households still rely on traditional biomass for cooking. This involves things like firewood and charcoal. And this leads to serious health and environmental effects, contributing to an estimated 26,000 deaths each year from indoor air pollution. Having looked at the scale of Kenya's energy poverty, let's now turn to what the government sees as the solution, which is the National Energy Policy. This policy's goal is to provide reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy system. If I can put it right, the government says that this is energy that not only powers development but also supports a just transition towards a cleaner, more inclusive future. What is powerful about this policy is that it does not only focus on electricity alone, it also focuses on other areas such as renewable resources like wind, solar, and geothermal. The policy also advocates for emerging technologies such as energy storage, green hydrogen, and smart grids. Now, when we look clearly at how the national energy policy represents its people and the problem of energy poverty, we see a very familiar pattern. A pattern which you can say that many development scholars have critiqued. The citizens are portrayed as beneficiaries. They are seen as people who will receive electricity, people who will receive clean cooking technologies, and people who will be connected to more grids. They are not seen as co-creators in shaping their own energy futures. The people are represented through terms such as marginalized communities, low-income populations, and rural households. This is a technocratic framing which risks depoliticizing energy poverty by treating it as a technical problem solvable through infrastructure and financing rather than as a manifestation of structural inequality. This is what James Ferguson calls the anti-politics machine. When development policies appear neutral and technical, they mask the deeper power relations that cause inequality. In this case, the national energy policy presents energy deprivation as an engineering problem rather than as the outcome of historical marginalization, gender inequality, uneven resource distribution, power relations, and income disparity. Palvia says that citizens are the final consumers of technology and the most important stakeholders. Therefore, their voices must shape how policies and innovations are designed. However, in this case, We see a framework that speaks for communities rather than with them. Now let us move to what this policy promises. The policy commits to universal access to electricity and clean cooking by 2030. This aims to close the gap that still leaves 1 in 4 Kenyans without power and nearly 7 in 10 still cooking with firewood and charcoal. The policy also places Kenya at the forefront of renewable energy development. This involves plans to expand geothermal, wind, and solar capacity. Perhaps the most inspiring thing about this policy is the stated commitment to just and equitable energy transition. This language signals awareness that the shift to clean energy must also address fairness. However, the question that lingers in my mind is, will these values hold when we move from words to action? Even though the National Energy Policy lays out a progressive roadmap, it also contains tensions and blind spots that could undermine its commitment to equity and justice. The first issue is the strong reliance on market driven solutions. When energy is treated as a commodity instead of a right, the poorest households, especially in rural areas, risk being left behind. Secondly, the Kenya energy transition relies heavily on imported systems and fuels. This dependency exposes Kenya to global price shocks and supply disruptions. Moreover, the policy references gender inclusion, but at the most rhetoric level. The policy doesn't clearly show how women, who bear the heaviest burden of energy poverty, will gain voice and agency in energy planning and benefit equally from cleaner energy technologies. Finally, the policy prioritizes expansion and innovation. It says less about quality, reliability, and affordability. Papainoya reminds us that innovation is a moral and political issue, not just an economic one. It must be governed by justice, redistribution, and public accountability. So, without a deliberate focus on equity and justice, Kenya's green transition could unintentionally reproduce inequality, echoing what Ferguson called the anti-politics machine. This is where policies seem neutral but end up reinforcing existing power structures. Now, to make the transition truly just, social justice cannot sit at the margins of energy planning. It must be at its core. As we continue to reflect on the promises and the perils of this policy, I want to ask a few questions to help us think deeper. The first is, if everyone is connected to electricity but can't afford to cook or run a business, can we really claim we have achieved energy equity? Secondly, how do we balance the drive for private sector participation with the need for social inclusion? What does a just energy transition truly mean for women and rural communities? How can Kenya avoid colonial patterns of access? Because we've realized that these continent electricity grids were originally built to serve colonial industries and not African households. If today's clean energy revolution once again centers industrial or urban priorities, then we risk reproducing the same geography of exclusion, just that under green branding this time round. And finally, who defines what leaving no one behind really means? Is it a government promise? Is it a donor target? Or is it something that communities must define for themselves through participation? As I conclude, I want to highlight key recommendations that I believe could make Kenya's energy transition truly just and inclusive. First, the government should embed justice as a core evaluative principle, prioritizing procedural inclusion and distributiveness fairness. Particularly, the Kenyan government must empower women and local communities as active energy decision makers. Kenya should also measure energy success not by how many people are connected, but how energy improves the people's capabilities. This includes their ability to live freer, healthier, and more productive lives. Finally, the government should ensure affordability for all. Access without affordability is only a partial success. And as Toyama reminds us, technology is an amplifier. Without strong institutions, tech deepens divides rather than leveling them. I believe that our challenge then is to ensure that Kenya's clean energy transition is not just technological but transformational, one that places justice, equity, and human dignity at its center. Thank you for listening, and I truly appreciate your time and attention. I'm looking forward to engaging with you further on this discussion.